Hello everybody, welcome back to the Matura Express. My name is Timna and today we're going to talk about basic note-taking again. Okay, so as I said, we're going to continue our talk about basic note-taking skills for the monologue. And what we're going to do today is, first of all, repeat to talk about the importance of note-taking in an oral exam. So I'll tell you really why it is so important to take notes correctly and to pay attention to that as well. And then we're going to recap basic note-taking about bullet points and about mind maps. And last but not least, we're going to talk about detailed note-taking and especially about multi-layered notes. So let's jump right in. The importance of note-taking in an oral exam. So as you guys might know, or should probably know, you have 30 minutes of preparation time before your exam, and that's when you should prepare yourself and should take notes about the topic that you're going to talk about. And taking notes kind of helps you to structure your thoughts, because you can really kind of write down what you're thinking about and structure, as I said, your ideas and kind of know or plan ahead what you want to say when, which is a really big thing in your presentation or exam. Some people actually can remember things better when writing them down. I am one of those people. I feel like sometimes if I write something down, I can remember it more easily. I can memorize it kind of better, especially if it's written down in a nice structured way, maybe even highlighted with colors to mark the important words. So to me that's really helpful, and I think a lot of people are that way. So if you are as well, then maybe really do especially pay attention to your notes. And of course, note-taking also does help you to remember vocabulary. So if you're looking at the words you've already written down, it might be a lot easier to remember good vocabulary that you could use in your exam that relates to the topic you are going to talk about. So now that we've established that note-taking is very important, and it's very important that you do it the right way, let's take a brief look at bullet points, basic note-taking in form of bullet points. We've talked about that last time as well, or no, I think not last time, but 3 weeks ago. You can check that stream out again if you want to, because I've included examples for bullet points and mind maps in that stream. So bullet points. What tips do I have for you if you are taking notes in form of bullet points? So first of all, use different symbols for different parts of your monologue. So you know that in part 1 of your exam, which is the part that you're mainly preparing for, because part 2 is a dialogue and you can't really prepare that. You can of course write down some vocabulary that you think you could be using, or you might want to use. That's really it for the dialogue, but for the monologue you can really prepare. So as you remember, there's usually 3 or 4 bullet points that have to be included in your monologue. And we'll also see an example of that later on in the stream. And And for each of these different bullet points, or each of these different kind of questions that you have to cover in your monologue, it might be helpful to use a different color for every aspect of your monologue, so that you can remember, I wrote that down in that color, so that's what relates to that, and so on and so forth. What's also really, really, really important is do not write whole sentences. Because if you just write a whole kind of big piece of paper full of sentences, or it's just one whole text, you won't really remember anything of that. It's way, way easier for the brain to remember if there's short sentences or even just keywords that will then stay in your brain and that will help you formulate sentences there and then. Also, if you want to try and learn a text by heart for your monologue, that's definitely not a good idea, because I can assure you that you will not remember that whole text, and you will get lost after, let's say, 3 sentences, and you won't know where you are and how you can continue. So it's way, way better to just write down keywords, remember those keywords, and then form sentences as you're doing the monologue, as you're speaking. And then also, if you're saying something and you think, oh, actually I think I want this sentence to go in a different direction, then it's no problem to just say, oh, wait a second, I actually didn't mean it that way. Can I start the sentence again? And then you just start the sentence again. That's definitely okay. That's no big deal. That's what happens in real life as well. So don't worry about that. That's good. That's normal. That's healthy. We already talked about colors. Oh yeah, you can also use different symbols for different parts of your monologue, and colors to highlight keywords, to highlight what you really wanna, what's really, really important. And yeah, that's the basic thing about bullet points. As I said, try and write down only the important things, so maybe only facts, verbs, descriptions, really only the things that have to be in the monologue, and forget about all the unnecessary descriptions around that, because you're gonna kind of make them up as you go. Remember to structure your notes, of course. As I said, structure is very, very important in the monologue. Because if you have already structured your notes the way that you then want to present them, you will kind of remember that in your brain, and you will have the picture of that piece of paper in your brain, and you can easily remember, okay, that's what I wanted to say first, and that comes second, and last I'll say that. And yeah, that's really all about bullet points. Let's move on to mind maps, which is quite similar, but they look a bit different. But the whole kind of basic facts are similar. Use colors, of course, structure your mind map in order of your monologue, and make use of the whole sheet that you have. So don't just draw your mind map on like this big of a, an area on a sheet that's this big. Can you see me? Yeah. So basically, use the whole sheet, because that's what it's here for, and it's way easier for you to write bigger and use up more space than to just scribble some tiny notes that you won't really be able to remember. Write down only the important things, as I said already. So it's basically the same important things as with bullet points, but I don't know if you can remember from 3 weeks ago, the mind maps are a bit more graphic. You can kind of draw them out a bit better. So, for example, with a word in the middle and then some kind of rays going out to your kind of under categories, and then so on and so forth. So that's something especially for people who are really very visual and can remember things easier when they're a bit graphic. No, when they're drawn out, basically. And yeah, and whether you're doing mind maps or bullet points, just personalize your notes, do them the way that you think you will get the most out of them, because after all it's your presentation and you have to make sense of your notes. Now let's talk about detailed note-taking. So, I would like to tell you about multi-layered notes, which sounds kind of complicated, but it's really not. It's just kind of structuring your notes a bit better and having a bit more detail to them. So instead of just kind of writing down lots of ideas, all in kind of one row of bullet points, let's say, you kind of write something and you have an under category, and then you write some bullet points to that under category, and then you move on to the next point and you have an under category, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of an easy way to structure your notes so that you can really remember things very well. As I said, it's way more detailed. It's way easier to navigate than just having a whole list of things. You can connect ideas with each other very easily, and yeah, let's look at an example. So I've brought you here task one of the exams that we're going to demonstrate next week. So if you're interested in that, we're going to talk about tolerance next week. Then tune in. So that's task one here. It's about ethnic minorities. The situation is, in history class you have talked a lot about ethnic minorities in Austria, and you thought that the issue was very interesting and that it would also make a good topic for a presentation you have to hold in your English class. Your task is to introduce the topic of ethnic minorities. Talk about what an ethnic minority is, ethnic minorities in Austria, and the general attitude of people towards ethnic minorities, especially in Austria. So, remember, you are a student. It's quite an easy role to play. And you're holding a presentation in class for your classmates. You have to talk about ethnic minorities, what they are, how the situation in Austria is basically, and yeah, what Austrian people's attitude towards ethnic minorities is. Okay, so this is what multi-layered notes could look like. Of course, you could also then use colors to highlight keywords which would really help here. So as you can see, I've put there here 3 bullet points, and I've put some under categories to those bullet points. So that I have 3 main things I want to say, and then the things I want to add to that in my under categories, which is really nice and structured, and I will be able to remember that very easily in my monologue. So what I've written down here is for the first bullet point. What is an ethnic minority? I've written down ethnic minority, a group of people who emigrated to or live in a country where the majority of the population is of a different culture or religion or heritage. And what I want to add to that then is that there are many ethnic minorities in Austria, especially because Austria has a very big history of emigration and immigration. And from there on, I'm just gonna continue to talk about that bullet point and then move on to the next point, which is the situation in Austria. So, for example, a few ethnic minority groups in Austria are Turkish people, people from former Yugoslavia, so Croatia, Serbia, and so on. Greek people, Sinti and Roma people, and those are just a few examples. And what you could talk about for this bullet point as well is that some of these groups have lived in Austria for many, many years and are integrated quite well. And then you could also, for example, bring up the topic of bilingual street signs in Carinthia, in Burgenland, and in Styria, because that's something that there are quite a lot of debates about all the time. And it kind of links to that topic as well of integration and so on. And then you can move on to the last bullet point, which is the attitude of Austrians. And personally, I would say the attitude of Austrians towards ethnic minorities is kind of mixed. And then what I want to go into detail about that is that most people are tolerant and inclusive in Austria, but there are still some that have kind of a negative attitude towards foreigners and are not that welcoming, but that's something we're all working on. And that's kind of the basis of detailed note-taking. As you can see, it's really, really helpful to be able to structure your notes. I think I've said that phrase about 3,000 times now in the last quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, but that's something that's really, really very important, because then you can remember it better. And that's all we're going to talk about today. If you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to ask them either in our live chat or in the comments below, then after the stream. And otherwise, we're going to see you next week with our exams about tolerance. If you're interested in that, tune in. And I wish you a nice evening and goodbye.